Alright, you guys, we are on the next little part of Chapter 6 of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So, we just left off with Harry finding Platform 9 3/4 because of the family that he meets. I don't want to give away any spoilers, but he meets Ron for the first time and his brothers, the twins, that you can tell that they start to cause a little bit of trouble, right? They're talking about sending home a toilet seat and stuff like that. So, that is where we leave off. He's on the train now to Hogwarts. Harry watched the girl and her mother disappear as the train rounded the corner. Houses flashed past the window. Harry felt a great leap of excitement. He didn't know what he was going to, but it had to be better than what he was leaving behind. The door of the compartment slid open and the youngest red-headed boy came in. "Anyone sitting there?" he asked, pointing at the seat opposite of Harry. "Everywhere else is full." Harry shook his head and the boy sat down. He glanced at Harry and then looked quickly out the window, pretending he hadn't looked. Harry saw he still had a black mark on his nose. "Hey, Ron." The twins were back. "Listen, we're going down the middle of the train. Lee Jordan's got a giant tarantula down there." "Right," mumbled Ron. "Harry," said the other twin, "did we introduce ourselves? Fred and George Weasley, and this is Ron, our brother." "See you later, then." "Bye," said Harry and Ron. The twins slid the compartment door shut behind them. "Are you really Harry Potter?" Ron blurted out. Harry nodded. "Oh, well, I thought it might be one of Fred and George's jokes," said Ron. "Have you really got, He pointed at Harry's forehead. Harry pulled back his bangs to show the lightning scar. Ron stared. "So that's where you know who?" "Yes," said Harry, "but I can't remember it." "Nothing?" said Ron eagerly. "Well, I remember a lot of green light, but nothing else." "Wow," said Ron. He sat and stared at Harry for a few moments. Then, as though he'd suddenly realized what he was doing, he looked quickly out the window again. "Are all of your family wizards?" asked Harry, who found Ron just as interesting as Ron found him. So you must know loads of magic already." The Weasleys were clearly one of those old wizarding families the pale boy in Diagon Alley had talked about. "Yes, I think so," said Ron. "I think my mom's got a second cousin who's an accountant, but we never talked to him." "I heard you went to live with Muggles," said Ron. "What are they like?" "Horrible. Well, not all of them. My aunt and uncle and cousin are, though. Wish I had 3 wizard brothers." "5, said Ron. For some reason he was looking gloomy. "I'm the 6th in our family to go to Hogwarts. You could say I've got a lot to live up to. Bill and Charlie have already left. Bill was head boy and Charlie was captain of the Quidditch. Now Percy's a prefect and Fred and George mess around a lot, but they still get really good marks. And everyone thinks they're really funny. Everyone expects me to do this as well as all of them. But if I do, it's no big deal, because they did it first. You never get anything either. Nothing new, with 5 brothers. I've got Bill's old robes, Charlie's old wand, and Percy's old rat." Ron reached inside his jacket and pulled out a fat gray rat, which was asleep. "His name is Scabbers, and he's useless. He hardly ever wakes up. Percy's got an owl from my dad for being made a prefect, but they couldn't... I got Scabbers instead." Ron's ears were pink. He seemed to think he said too much, because he went back to staring out the window. Harry didn't think there was anything wrong with not being able to afford an owl. After all, he'd never had any money in his life until a month ago, and he told Ron so, all about having to wear Dudley's old clothes and never getting proper birthday presents. That seemed to cheer Ron up. "And until Hagrid told me, I didn't know anything about being a wizard, or about my parents, or about Voldemort." Ron gasped. "What?" said Harry. "You said whose name," said Ron, sounding both shocked and impressed. "I'd have thought you of all people." "I'm not trying to be brave or anything, saying the name," said Harry. "I just never knew you shouldn't. See what I mean? I've got loads to learn, I bet," he added, voicing for the first time something that had been worrying him a lot lately. "I bet I'm the worst in the class." "You won't be. There's loads of people who come from Muggle families, and they learn quick enough." While they'd been talking, the train had carried them out of London, and now they are speeding past fields full of cows and sheep. They were quiet for a time, watching the fields and lanes flick past. Around 12:30, there was a great clattering outside the corridor, and smiling, dimpled women slid back their door and said, "Anything off the carts, dear?" Harry, who hadn't had breakfast, leapt to his feet, but Ron's ears went pink again, and he muttered that he'd brought sandwiches. Harry went out into the corridor. He had never had any money for candy with the Dursleys, and now that he had pockets rattling with gold and silver, he was ready to buy as many Mars bars as he could carry. But the woman didn't have Mars bars. What she did have were Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, Jurtle's best glowing bum, chocolate frogs, pumpkin pasties, Charlton cakes, licorice wands, and a number of strange things Harry had never seen in his life. Not wanting to miss anything, he got some of everything and paid the woman 11 silver sickles and 7 bronze knuts. Ron stared at Harry as he brought it all back to the compartment and tipped it onto the empty seat. "Hungry, are you?" "Starving," said Harry, taking a large bite out of a pumpkin pasty. Ron had taken a lumpy package and unwrapped it. There were 4 sandwiches inside. He pulled one of them apart and said, "She always forgets I don't like corned beef." "Swap you for one of these," said Harry, holding up a pasty. "Go on." "You don't want this. It's all dry," said Ron. "She hasn't got much time," he added quickly. "You know, with 5 of us." "Go on and have a pasty," said Harry, who had never had anything to share before, or indeed anyone to share it with. It was a nice feeling, sitting there with Ron, eating their way through all of Harry's pasties, cakes, and candies. The sandwiches lay forgotten. "What are these?" Harry asked Ron, holding him a pack of chocolate frogs. "They're not really frogs, are they?" He was starting to feel that nothing would surprise him. "No," said Ron, "but see what the card is. I'm missing a few." "What?" "Oh, of course, you wouldn't know. Chocolate frogs have cards inside, you know, to collect. Famous witches and wizards. I've got about 500, but I haven't got Agrippa or Ptolemy." Harry unwrapped his chocolate frog and picked up the card. It showed a man's face. He wore half-moon glasses and a long, crooked nose, flowing silver hair, beard, and mustache. Underneath the picture was the name, Albus Dumbledore. "So this is Dumbledore," said Harry. "Don't tell me you never heard of Dumbledore," said Ron. "Can I have a frog? I might get Agrippa. Thanks." Harry turned over his card and read, "Albus Dumbledore, currently headmaster of Hogwarts. Considered by many the greatest wizards of modern time. Dumbledore is particularly famous for his defeat of the dark wizard Grindelwald in 1945, for the discovery of the 12 uses of dragon blood, and the work of alchemy with his partner, Nicholas Flamel. Professor Dumbledore enjoys chamber music and 10-pin bowling." Harry turned the card over and saw, to his astonishment, that Dumbledore's face had disappeared. "He's gone." "Well, you can't expect him to hang around all day," said Ron. "He'll be back." "No, I've got Morgan again, and I've got about 6 of her. Do you want it? You can start collecting." Ron's eyes strayed to the pile of chocolate frogs waiting to be unwrapped. "Help yourself," said Ron. "But in, you know, the Muggle world, people just say 'put' in photos." "Do they? What? They don't move at all?" Ron sounded amazed. "Weird." So in the wizarding world, if you take a picture of someone, the picture moves with however the person was moving, kind of like a live picture on an iPhone, so it moves around. And so Harry's like, "That doesn't happen in the Muggle world," and Ron's like, "What?" So it's kind of funny. Harry stared at Dumbledore as he slid the picture back onto the card and gave him a small smile. Ron was more interested in eating the frogs than looking at the famous witches and wizard cards, but Harry couldn't keep his eyes off of them. Soon he had not only had Dumbledore and Morgan, but Heist Woodroffe, and Albert Gunran, and Kirsten Parcelis, and Merlin. He finally tore his eyes from the dirtiest Silion, who scratched her nose to open a bag of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. "You want to be careful with those," Ron warned Harry. "When they say every flavor, they mean every flavor. You know, you get all the ordinary ones like chocolate and peppermint, but then you get spinach and liver and tripe. George reckons he had a booger-flavored one once." Ron picked up the green bean, looking at it carefully, and bit into a corner. "Ah, see? Sprouts." They had a good time eating the every flavor beans. Harry got toast, coconut, baked beans, strawberry, curry, grass, coffee, sardine, and was even brave enough to nibble the end of a funny gray one Ron wouldn't touch, which turned out to be pepper. The countryside now flying past the window was becoming wilder. The neat fields had gone. Now there were woods, twisting rivers, and dark green hills. There was a knock on the door of their compartment, and the round-faced boy Harry had passed on the platform 9 3/4 came in. He looked tearful. "Sorry," he said, "but have you seen my Toad?" When they shook their heads, he wailed, "I've lost him. He keeps getting away from me." "He'll turn up," said Harry. Yes, said the boy miserably. Well, if you see him. And he left. Don't know why he's so bothered, said Ron. If I brought a toad, I'd lose it as quick as I could. Mind you, I did bring Scabbers, so I can't talk. The rat was still snoozing on Ron's lap. He might have died and you wouldn't know the difference, said Ron in disgust. I tried to turn him yellow yesterday to make him more interesting, but the spell didn't work. I'll show you, look. He rummaged around in his trunk and pulled out a very battered-looking wand. It was chipped in places and something white was glistening at the end. Unicorn hairs pretty much poking out. Anyway, he had just raised his wand when the compartment door slid open again. The toadless boy was back, and this time he had a girl with her. She was already wearing her new Hogwarts robes. Has anyone seen a toad? Neville's lost one, she said, and she had a bossy sort of voice. Lots of bushy brown hair and rather large front teeth. We've already told him we haven't seen it, said Ron, but the girl wasn't listening. She was looking at the wand in his hands. Are you doing magic? Let's see it. She sat down and Ron looked taken aback. All right. He cleared his throat. Sunshine daisies, butter mellow, turn this stupid fat rat yellow. He waved his wand, but nothing happened. Scabbers stayed gray and fast asleep. Are you sure that's a real spell? Said the girl. Well, it's not very good, is it? I've tried a few simple spells just for practice, and it's all worked for me. Nobody in my family's magic at all. It was ever such a surprise when I got my letter, but I was ever so pleased, of course. I mean, it's the very best school of witchcraft there is, I've heard. I've learned all of the course books by heart, of course. I just hope it'll be enough. I'm Hermione Granger, by the way. Who are you? She said all of this very fast. Harry looked at Ron and was relieved to see his stunned face, that she hadn't learned all the course books by heart either. I'm Ron Weasley, Ron muttered. Harry Potter, said Harry. Are you really? Said Hermione. I know all about you, of course. I've got a few extra books for the background reading, and you're in modern magical history, and the rise and fall of the dark arts, and the great wizarding events of the 20th century. Am I? Said Harry, feeling dazed. Goodness, didn't you know? I'd find out everything I could if it was me, said Hermione. Do either of you know what house you'll be in? I've been asking around, and I hope I'm in Gryffindor. It sounds by far the best. I hear Dumbledore himself was in it. But I suppose Ravenclaw wouldn't be bad. Anyway, we'd better go look for Neville's toad. You two better change. You know, I expect we'll be there soon. As she left, taking the toadless boy with her. Whatever house I'm in, I hope she's not in it, said Ron. He threw his wand back into the trunk. Stupid spell. George gave it to me. Bet he knew it was a dud. What house are your brothers in? Asked Harry. Gryffindor, said Ron. Gloom seemed to be settling in on him again. Mum and Dad were in it too. I don't know what they'll say if I'm not. I don't suppose Ravenclaw would be too bad, but imagine if they put me in Slytherin. That's the house you know who was in. Yeah, said Ron. He flopped back into his seat, looking depressed. You know, I think the ends of Scabbers' whiskers are a bit lighter, said Harry, trying to make Ron's mind off of houses. So what do your oldest brothers do now that they've left anyway? Harry was wondering what a wizard did once he'd finished school. Charlie's in Romania studying dragons, and Bill's in Africa doing something for Gringotts, said Ron. Did you hear about Gringotts? It's been all over the Daily Prophet, but I don't suppose you get that with the Muggles. Someone tried to rob a high-security vault. Harry stared. Really? What happened to them? Nothing. That's why it's such big news. They haven't been caught. My dad says it must have been a powerful dark wizard to get around Gringotts, but they don't think they took anything. That's what's odd. Of course, everyone gets scared when something like this happens, in case you know who's behind it. Harry turned the news over in his mind. He started to get a prickle of fear every time you know who was mentioned. He supposed this was all part of entering the magical world, but it had been a lot more comfortable saying Voldemort without worrying. What's your Quidditch team? Ron asked. I don't know, Harry confessed. What? Ron looked dumbfounded. Oh, wait. It's the best game in the world. And he was off, explaining all the things about the 4 balls and the positions of the 7 players, describing famous games he'd been to with his brothers and the broomstick he'd like to get if he had the money. He was just taking Harry through the finer points of the game when the compartment door slid open yet again, and it wasn't Neville the toadless boy, or Hermione Granger this time. 3 boys entered, and Harry recognized the middle one at once. It was the pale boy from Madame Malkin's robe shop, and he was looking at Harry with a lot more interest than he'd shown back at Diagon Alley. Is it true, he said, They're saying all down the train that Harry Potter's in this compartment. So, it's you, isn't it?" "Yes," said Harry. He was looking at the other boys. Both of them were the thickest and looked extremely mean. Standing on either side of the pale boy, they looked like bodyguards. "Oh, this is Grab and Goyle," said the pale boy carelessly, noticing where Harry was looking. "And my name's Malfoy, Draco Malfoy." Ron gave a slight cough, which might have been hiding a snicker. Draco Malfoy looked at him. "Think my name's funny, do you? No need to ask who you are. My father told me all the Weasleys have red hair, freckles, and more children than they can afford." He turned back to Harry. "You'll soon find out some wizarding families are much better than others, Potter. You don't want to be making friends with the wrong set. I can help you there." He held out his hand to shake Harry's, but Harry didn't take it. "I think I can tell who the wrong sort are for myself, thanks," he said coolly. Draco Malfoy didn't go red, but a pink ting appeared in his pale cheeks. "I'd be careful if I were you, Potter," he said slowly. "Unless you're a bit politer, you'll go the same way as your parents. They didn't know what was good for them either. Hang around with a rifle like the Weasleys and that Hagrid, and it'll rub off on you." Both Harry and Ron stood up. "Say that again," Ron said, his face as red as his hair. "Oh, you're going to fight us, are you?" Malfoy sneered. "Unless you get out now," said Harry, and more bravely than he felt, because Grab and Goyle were a lot bigger than him or Ron. "But we didn't feel like leaving, do we, boys? We've never eaten all of our food, and you seem to have some." Goyle reached towards the chocolate frogs next to Ron, and Ron leapt forward. But before he'd so much as touched Goyle, Goyle let out a horrible yell. Scabbers the rat was hanging off his finger, sharp like teeth sunk into his Goyle's knuckle. Grab and Malfoy backed away as Goyle swung Scabbers round and round, howling when Scabbers finally flew off and hit the window. All three of them disappeared at once. Perhaps they thought this was more rats lurking among the sweets, or perhaps they heard footsteps because a second later Hermione Granger had come in. "What has been going on?" she said, looking at all the sweets on the floor and Ron picking up Scabbers by his tail. "I think he's been knocked out," Ron said to Harry. He looked closer at Scabbers. "No, I don't believe it. He's gone back to sleep." And so he had. "You've met Malfoy before." Harry explained about their meeting in Diagon Alley. "I've heard of his family," said Ron. "They were some of the first to come back to our side after you-know-who disappeared. Said they'd been bewitched. My dad doesn't believe it. He says Malfoy's father didn't need an excuse to go over to the dark side." He turned to Hermione. "Can we help you with something?" "You better hurry up and put your robes on. I've just been up to the front to ask the conductor, and he says we're nearly there." "You haven't been fighting, have you? You'll be in trouble before we get there." "Scabbers has been fighting, not us," said Ron, scowling at her. "Would you mind leaving us while we change?" "All right. I only came in here because outside of behaving very childish, racing up and down the corridors," said Hermione in a sniffy voice. "And if you got dirt on your nose, you've got dirt on your nose, by the way. Did you know?" Ron glared at her as she left. Harry peered out the window, and it was getting dark. He could see mountains and forests under a deep purple sky. The train did just seem to be slowing down. He and Ron took off their jackets and pulled on their long black robes. Ron's were a bit short for him. You could see his sneakers underneath. A voice echoed through the train. "You will be reaching Hogwarts in 5 minutes' time. Please leave your luggage on the train. It will be taken up to the school separately." Harry's stomach lurched with nerves, and Ron, he saw, looked pale under his freckles. They crammed to their pockets with the last of the sweets and joined the crowd thronging the corridor. The train slowed right down and finally stopped. People pushed their way towards the door and out on a tiny dark platform. Harry shivered in the cold night air. Then a lamp came bobbing over the heads of the students, and Harry heard a familiar voice. First years over here." "All right there, Harry." Hagrid's big hairy face beamed over the sea of heads. "Come on, follow me. Any more first years? Mind your step now. First years, follow me." Slipping and stumbling, they followed Hagrid down what seemed to be a steep, narrow path. It was so dark on either side of them that Harry thought there must be thick trees there. Nobody spoke much. Neville, the boy who kept losing his toad, sniffed once or twice. "You'll get your first sight of Hogwarts in a sec," Hagrid called over his shoulder, "just around this bend here." There was a loud "ooh." The narrow path had opened suddenly onto an edge of a great black lake. Perched atop a high mountain on the other side, its windows sparkling in the starry sky, was a vast castle with many turrets and towers. "No more on a 4 to a boat," Hagrid called, pointing to a fleet of little boats sitting by the water on the shore. Harry and Ron were followed into their boat by Neville and Hermione. "Everyone in?" shouted Hagrid, who had a boat to himself. "Right then, forward!" And the fleet of little boats moved off all at once, gliding across the lake, which was as smooth as glass. Everyone was silent, staring up at the great castle overhead. It towered over them as they sailed nearer and nearer the cliff of which it stood. "Heads down!" yelled Hagrid as the first boats reached the cliff. They all bent their heads, and the little boats carried them through the curvy of ivy that hid a wide opening in the cliff face. They were carried along a dark tunnel, which seemed to be taking them right underneath the castle, until they reached a kind of underground harbor, where they clambered out onto the rocks and pebbles. "Oi, you there! Is this your Toad?" said Hagrid, who was checking the boats as people climbed out of them. "Trevor!" cried Neville blissfully, holding out his hands. Then they clambered up the passageway in the rocks after Hagrid's lamp, coming out at last onto a smooth, damp grass right in the shadow of the castle. They walked up the flight of stone steps and crowded around the huge oak front door. "Everyone here? You there? You still got your Toad?" Hagrid raised a gigantic fist and knocked 3 times on the castle door. All right, so that was a little bit longer of a read, but I just wanted to make sure that we are going to get through this before the end of the year, so I wanted to finish that chapter. So we'll read tomorrow, chapter 7, The Sorting Hat. Tomorrow. See you then.